I think that leads into the final point, Ryan. I think is a tremendous segue, by the way. The thing that I think leads to my expectations for this defense being high, despite some question marks. Everybody's got question marks coming into the season. Everyone. The optimism I have is because even at the positions where there's question marks, what you have everywhere is depth and most importantly, experience depth. And you look at linebacker, right? Like Bo Bowers played a lot of football. He is experienced. Jordan Patelho has now played a decent amount of football. Prince Collie has a year under his belt. You don't need the freshman to come in. In past years, the freshman would have had to play. I mean, they'd have had no choice. At least, I mean, as number twos at the very least. And now you're in a situation where you're talking about a guy like Gabriel Rubio, who's a top 100 recruit, is struggling to see the field. You know, I mean, you're talking about scenarios where in the secondary where you've got like four guys that have played a lot of football battling it out for one spot. You know, you're talking about cornerback. You've got Tariq Bracy has played a ton of football, right? Like Tariq's back for his fifth year, but like Bo Bauer, he and Kurt Hinish, he's a fifth year because of COVID. Tariq has played all 4 years of his career. I mean, going back to his freshman year against Pitt, I remember the first time we really saw Tariq break out. Dante Vaughn was replacing Troy Pride. Dante was having a rough day. Tariq comes off the bench, solidifies thing. He comes in, he's playing the nickel against Florida State. Florida State goes at him 7 times, 0 for 7 going after Tariq. Played really well against USC that year at the end of the season, going against some bigger receivers. They caught like one back shoulder on him, and other than that, I thought he played great. 19, he's got some great moments, like against Georgia, some down moments. 2020, we've talked about, was a down year for him. 2021, but the point is, this kid's played a ton of football, right? Clarence Lewis was forced into the field too early his first 2 years. He played way more football than I would have anticipated, and I'm someone who liked Clarence coming in. Now we're going to see the benefits of that. We're going to see Notre Dame benefit from the fact that Clarence Lewis was put in so many spots to struggle the last couple years, right? How will Notre Dame use him? That remains a question, and that's going to determine how successful he'll be. And a little preview of what we're going to discuss tomorrow. But what you have, Ryan, is you have depth and experience everywhere, compared to last year where it was a lot of what ifs on defense last year.
Yeah.
A lot of, especially once Maris went down, it was like, well, I don't know what we're going to get from JD Bertrand. Right. JD's hardly, I mean, he's only played like a couple mop-up snaps. We've never seen JD Bertrand in action. I don't know what he's going to do. Jack Kaiser is having to replace Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. Well, now Jack just has to be a better version of what he was last year. It's no longer, we're not worried about Jeremiah being replaced anymore. That's already been done, right? I mean, he's now 2 years removed. You're not saying, hey, be the next Jeremiah. No, go be a better version of who you were last year, Jack. That's all we need you to do. And that's kind of where you get into this. You know, who's going to replace Dalen Hayes and Adetokunbo Ogundeji? Well, now we know. Isaiah is now proven. Isaiah was an unproven player going into last year. A lot of potential, a lot of upside, right? We were talking about him kind of like we're talking about Riley Mills now. Like when this kid got on the field last year, he was pretty good. He just needs to be more consistent and can he take over, play-making role, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he's a guy that played, was a rotation guy. Well, now we have these answers, right? Now we know who these guys are. What's Riley Mills going to do? Now we know at least the floor of what he can be. Sure. And I think that is the final piece for me, Ryan, that says, okay, this team has a chance to be really good.
Yeah, so I would like to say this. We have seen guys like Clarence Lewis struggle, right, over his first 2 years because he's pressed a little too early into duty, to your point, right? We have seen Jack Kaiser at times struggle a little bit last year. You've seen JD Bertrand at times struggle. Sometimes that is another blessing in disguise. Because I know we're not talking about offensive line today, but I think that it's going to be incredibly beneficial for this team, the fact that a lot of the guys struggled last year. I think it's going to help them because now they have seen what their limitations are. And I know limitations is a very negative kind of, has a negative connotation to it, but they have seen the best and the worst already. So I think that when you're seeing what a Clarence has gone through, he's been through the ringer. There is a thing called baptism by fire, right? Throwing these guys in, sometimes some players do not come out the other side, the best version of themselves, but sometimes they do. And everything we've heard of Clarence Lewis, for instance, he is about as hard a worker on this team as anybody in the Notre Dame program. So I have no doubt that he is working to be the best version of himself. And that has helped to create depth for this team. The fact that guys have had to play. And now we're in a position this year where some guys that are incredibly talented won't have to play because Notre Dame has created depth for themselves. It wasn't maybe a couple of their pathways wasn't exactly what you would have liked it to be to get to this point. But no matter how you look at it, Clarence Lewis has played 2 years and a lot of snaps. They have the opportunity now to come out on the other side because they had been forced into inopportune positions. But now that has created depth, that has created experience. So to your point, Brian, to my previous point as well, there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of talent, and there's a lot of good football players that aren't even going to get a chance to step on the football field this year as much because of how much Notre Dame has created depth on the defensive side of the football.
And that's where you need to be in today's game.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, in today's game especially, you have to have numbers. And I've talked about this with sources in Notre Dame. They're like, one of the issues we had last year is like Clarence played more than we wanted him to last year. Just because of, like I said, the fact that we at least knew what you're going to get from him. And with some of the injuries that they had, that if Clarence doesn't play better this year, he just won't be playing. They have other options now. Guys that have stepped up, guys that have more experience. You've got the freshmen coming in. There's a lot more possibilities now. Last year, you had Ryan Barnes coming off of a year where he didn't play as a senior in high school. He hadn't played football in really 2 years. You look at Philip Riley, was a raw kid. Chance Tucker played 3 games his senior year and it was in the spring, because they canceled the fall in California.
Yep.
And now you've got those 3 guys now have a year into the system. Plus you bring Jaden Mickey in. Plus you have Benjamin Morrison. Plus now Cam Hart's a guy who was another question mark going into last year. We always knew he was talented, but kid's a wide receiver. He was having the same problem in 2020 that Ryan Barnes had last year. He would flash, but there was just the consistency wasn't there as a guy that was transitioning over from wide receiver.
And limited reps with everything that's going on with COVID.
Because of COVID, that he missed the spring. His first full spring as a corner he missed because of COVID. You're absolutely right. It's a great point, Ryan. Yep. And so he was behind. And so you're like, what is he going to be? And then he steps up and he plays really good football. So that's kind of where a lot of our optimism comes from the defense. There are so few what ifs this year compared to last year. Mm-hmm. You're transitioning to a new defense. You won't be making the same type of dramatic transition this year. There will be things that are different with Al Golden, but it won't be the same dramatic shift from Clark Lea's philosophy to Marcus Freeman's. Way more proven production coming back at linebacker. Way more proven production coming back at a defensive line. Depth at both positions is much better this year because of arrivals of freshmen plus younger players now growing up. And Jason Nonye is a year closer to being a contributor than he was last year. Way more depth in the secondary. Now, guys got to prove themselves. Sure. But even at safety, think about this. Down the stretch, Notre Dame won their last 6 games with 2 safeties playing who had started the year, one started the year at corner, the other started the year at receiver. Uh-huh. That's who they were throwing out there to try to beat Oklahoma State in a bowl game, right? But now you're in a situation where those guys have a full year now under their belt as defensive players. There's 100%. Not the big what-ifs anymore. And so now Houston Griffith and DJ Brown, who had some okay moments last year and some not okay moments last year, they can't play like they did last year. They won't be on the field. Last year, they were going to be on the field no matter how they played, which is why they had to move Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts. So now you're in the margin for error this year on defense is much greater than it was last year. And Ryan, we're talking about a team in Notre Dame that was still pretty good on defense last year.
Sure.
I mean, going into they finished last year 14th in scoring defense. That was with giving up 37 points in a bowl game. Mm-hmm. And so this was a pretty good defense last year. 100%. And it had a lot of problems. And yes, they played a weak schedule, but the thing about the weak schedule is they didn't play weak offenses.
No.
That's the thing. The teams that they played had crap defenses. But you look down the stretch now, and everybody says, well, Virginia didn't have Brennan Armstrong. That matters. That matters big time.
Sure.
But they still had all those receivers that you love, and they couldn't do anything against Notre Dame in regulation. North Carolina had a really good offense. Well, other than a couple big plays and some Sam Howell scrambles, they weren't able to move the ball up and down the field in the defense. They shut down USC's offense. They completely shut down Georgia Tech. Stanford had, one big play? I mean, they got a guy at quarterback that people are projecting as a first-round draft pick this year. Yeah. They played good offenses last year during that time when the overall teams that they were playing were not good. You can't say that about the offense. I mean, you look at what they did to Purdue. It didn't look like much at the time because Purdue wasn't that good the year before. But by the end of the year, that holding Purdue to 13 points looked pretty flipping good.
Sure
When you
does.
saw what Purdue became at the end of the year. So that's kind of where I'm at with this team, Ryan, is defensively I have a lot more optimism. And there's a lot more – we have a lot more answers on this team than we did last year. Where last year, what was the one answer we had last year? We knew that Kyle Hamilton was a returning All-American, and you knew that you were going to get steady play from Myron and Kurt. But even with Myron, he was moving positions.
Sure.
Right? And you knew that Drew White was going to be a steady, solid player. Those are the only things we knew last year. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. That's the only things that we knew. Jason was going into his first year as a starter. Isaiah was going into his first year as a starter. Cam Hart was going into his first year really playing meaningful snaps. At the beginning of the year, Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson weren't even playing the positions that they're playing now. You know, like one of the most experienced guys going into last year was Clarence Lewis, who's a true sophomore.
Yep.
And if it tells you kind of about – and they were still a sub-20 point per game defense. And so you want to know why we're optimistic about this defense? That's it right there. They have a lot of potential stars. They have a really loaded front seven, an athletic and deep and experienced front seven. And the secondary is the question, right? But two stars that they potentially have are in the secondary.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teams that would love to be going into the season with question marks in the secondary that include having Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph in it.
And a lot of NFL teams would also love to have those two players that you just mentioned as well. So yes, it's very talented. I'll say this too, Brian. I don't want to forget to mention this. This is going to be one of from a pure defensive unit perspective, this is going to be one of the fastest defenses that I can remember at Notre Dame personally.
Yes.
I mean, when you look at Maris can run, Cam Hart can run, Brandon Joseph can run, Xavier Watts can run, Ramon Henderson can run. Defensive line-wise, Isaiah Foskey can run. We talked about Jack Kaiser can run. Jason Adamolola can run. All these guys have a larger margin for error because, man, they're athletic. This is a really athletic. And I think we saw that in the spring. You know, even when guys were maybe making mistakes, it was fast mistakes, right? Like you're like, oh, these guys can move, man. They're closing on the football incredibly fast. So are there going to be mistakes at times? Sure. There always are. There's always some sort of miscommunication or someone's in the wrong gap or someone got a wrong coverage call or whatever it is. But all I know is I am trying to rack my brain on when was the last time Notre Dame was this more athletic as a whole on the defensive side of the football. And I'm having trouble just figuring out what that year is, man, because this is going to be a fast defense, very fast.
I mean, we thought last year's defense was going to be fast, and I think that changed a little bit when Maris got hurt. But still, I mean, you knew that they're going to have some speed. I think the 28 defense was a great defense, but it was great because you had smart football players on it. Like, although he wasn't fast, he ran a 4.6 at this combine. Jalen Elliott ran a 4.8, but you and I both know Jalen Elliott's faster than a 4.8. That's why he's still in the NFL. You know, Troy Pride was a burner, but Julian Love ran a mid 4.5 at the pro day, at the combine, and then at the pro day, meaning he couldn't improve it. You know, Drew Tranquil was one of the more athletic guys. He ran a 4.58, which is really good for a will linebacker. But I'd be willing to bet you Maris definitely beats that. But Tavon Coney wasn't fast. He was explosive, but he wasn't fast. Right? He wasn't a sideline to sideline guy. I don't know if JD will either, but he's going to be closer. The rover in 2018 was Osmar Bilal, who was fast, but he didn't play fast because he didn't know what he was doing out there, to the point where they rarely used him at rover unless they were playing like a pro I team like Stanford back then. So, and then you look at the D line. Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely the most athletic Notre Dame defense they've had in a while. And I would argue speed wise, yes, I think there's a lot of legit 4.4 guys in this defensive backfield. Now, can some of those guys play? That's the question. Can Ramon Henderson play? We'll find out. But I'll say this right to you right now. The trio of Ramon Henderson, Brandon Joseph, and Xavier Watts at safety with Tariq Bracy, Clarence Lewis, and Cam Hart in the corner is definitely faster as a unit than the 2018 secondary, which was a great secondary. The question is, can they play like those guys. Because Julian Love wasn't an All-American because of his speed. He was an All-American because of what he had up here. Alohi
100%.
Gilman wasn't a great player for Notre Dame because of his speed. He was athletic, right? He just wasn't fast. But he was an All-American because of what he has up here and what he had in here. Same with Jalen Elliott. He was a really smart football player. Can this team play with the football IQ of that 2018 defense? That's the big question for me. But if they can come even close to what the 2018 team was intellectually, leadership-wise, instinct-wise, will be Notre Dame's best defense since 2012. It will be that, but that's a bit, and we'll get into that tomorrow more. But that's the big question. That's not the strength. The strength that Ryan just pointed out is athleticism, speed, and depth of athleticism and speed. Right? Is if they lose a guy, they're putting another athletic guy on the field. That's a key, and that's
100%.
where the margin for error becomes wider. Is when you can run, you can overcome some of those other mistakes. What would hurt Notre Dame in the past is when those guys would make mental mistakes, they weren't athletic enough to overcome it. And this group is. So we'll find out. So that's going to do it for
overcompensating trait, man.
That's
Always
right.
love
It
to
is.
run the
It is. Flat out
trait.
it is. Flat out it is.